Hi, good morning. Especially good morning to those of you who were at Lindenbrow last night with me. Good job getting here. I know how hard it was for me to get up this morning, so nice work. My name is Adam. I work at the Rust Foundation on ecosystem security. I've got a focus on supply chains at the moment, and I'm not talking about supply chain security, so that's going to be a little bit different. I'm also a member of the Crates.io team. Crates is the registry used for public Rust packages, the same as PyPI, the NPM registry, and so on, basically. Historically, though, I've got a background in a bunch of different languages. I've done lots of different things. I've been dabbling in Rust for like a decade, but I've only been working professionally in Rust at the Rust Foundation since March, so I'm probably going to sound a lot more confident about things than I actually really am. So we'll see how that goes. Also, in the anonymous review feedback we got for the talk, my dog got a mention, so this is Stanley. As you can see, he's kind of a red teamer when it comes to breaking things, but he's a good boy. So why am I giving this talk? Why am I up here talking about namespacing when there's a lot of actually interesting security talks about really deeply technical things that I definitely understand if my boss asks? Well, put simply, it's a problem of naming. So let's go back about 10 years. Rust was on its way to its first stable 1.0 release, and part of that process was doing what all the cool languages had in 2014 and building out a package ecosystem. So Rust got a build system called Cargo, it needed a backend to talk to, and Crates.io was born. Rust's package management was, and a lot of things about Rust's community really in the early days, were heavily inspired by, in particular, Ruby, to a lesser extent, Node. And so a lot of inspiration was taken from Bundler and Ruby gems. Now, also, Node and NPM, but it doesn't really change anything. So I'm going to talk a bit more about Ruby a little bit later on, but the main thing for anybody who doesn't know Ruby in the room is packages just have a flat namespace. There's no concept of namespacing, essentially. It's like, if you want, say, the Sinatra package, you have a gem file that looks like that, and boom, Frankie. Excellent. Although I actually like the Avalanche's song, Frankie Sinatra, better, or the Cake song. This has a bunch of conceptual advantages, the big one being that it's really simple. Just having a single name for things is very easy for people to wrap their head around, and apparently it kind of worked because those numbers keep going up and it's kind of terrifying. But we're 9 years in now, and to be honest, it's creaking a little around the edges as a strategy, just having a flat namespace. So earlier this year, the Crates.io team, and more specifically my long-suffering team lead and co-worker at the Rust Foundation, Toby, posted an RFC to basically clarify our policies around name squatting and spam, because basically we didn't have any policies around name squatting and spam. This had been an increasing issue for us. There are several really notorious users who we get weekly complaints about who took, to a first approximation, all the good names on Crates.io. If you want to call a package any, well, that one got taken 5 years ago by someone who's never written a line of code. So not ideal. We've even heard rumors that some of the people who hold some of these names might have even asked for money in exchange to release the names. And it's that's just not cool, right? This is a community resource. I want people to think of themselves as stewards of their packages, not necessarily owners, because we're all going to die. I would like my packages to live on after I die, ideally, if they're still useful. Or they can die with me if they're not. I'm not that egotistical. So we had a fair bit of community clamoring on, basically, please do something about this. Now, there's one interesting thing here, and actually I'm just going to hop back for a second. That number looks really big, 130,000 crates. Crates are packages in Rust. We just call them a different thing because, Rust. But it's not really that many. Most of the language ecosystems I'm going to talk about have multiples of that number of packages. Some of them have flat namespaces. Why is this more of a problem for us? And I think this kind of captures some of it. I'm going to come back to this later in the talk as to why I think the flat namespace was particularly a problem for Rust in a way that I don't think it has been for Python and for Ruby and for others. So this is like a few months old now. The RFC is trending towards acceptance. I sort of hope, fingers crossed, that it will be merged soon, because it will allow us to actually do something about this. But the other thing that comes through is there's a ton of comments even on this RFC about, well, this wouldn't be a problem if Rust had namespaces. Like, you know, you're patching the wrong thing, right? And so there's a couple of aspects of that. The first is, we're doing this because it's a hell of a lot simpler than building namespaces into cargo and crates and all the other places where that matters. Also, there is actually work happening on that. There have been a bunch of proposals for namespaces. The most mature one is by Manish Goragalkar, who first published this draft RFC like 3 years ago. And it basically adds NPM-style optional namespacing. It's honestly, to my knowledge, the only viable path forward right now in the Rust ecosystem. But there's a lot of implementation detail. Like, the one-sentence version is it's like NPM, basically. Scope, you get optional scopes. Other people involved in Rust packaging have also expressed the opinion that maybe this doesn't actually solve the problem. Like, you know, if you add optional namespaces, what stops people from squatting on those namespaces? And this came into sharper focus this year because we had our very first typo squatting attack. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point very much because I suspect at PackagingCon most of the people in the room actually know what typo squatting is. But yeah, as said, we basically, we had an attack. It was really bad. It was like massively incompetent, which was really nice. But yeah, basically the one-line version is typo squatting, 2 packages, one's bad, one's good. You know, one's popular and good, and then if you have the name that, say, doesn't have a dash in it, then you might be able to do something evil with it. And this is particularly a problem for a language like Rust, where there are arbitrary Turing-complete build scripts that don't run in sandboxes the moment you basically run Rust Analyzer on your code base. This is bad. But the reality is, it's also where we are. You know, that seemed like a good idea 10 years ago. It's very deeply embedded in the ecosystem. So we got to do something. So there are ways to analyze or to look for typo squatting in registries. One is a project that came out of this paper called TypoGuard. It was by a team at the University of Kansas, among other places. And basically, it's essentially just a bunch of heuristics where it's like, take your popular packages, take all your packages, and basically look for things that might just be like bit flips or change version numbers or added or remove punctuation or things like that. And it's one of those things where it feels really obvious once you know it and once you've looked at the code. And it's not particularly complicated, but it's really actually super effective. So I've taken this and I'm in the process of integrating into crates.io right now. It's actively undergoing work, where active really means I have a PR open, it's been approved, I have to fix the merge conflicts and hit merge. Toby, if you're watching, I promise I'll do that next week. So I'm not going to get into numbers, but I did use this approach to analyze some different ecosystems, because I'm trying to figure out, really, if we add namespacing to Rust, is it worth it, given the implementation pain involved, and what should it look like? So let's go on a quick tour of some other languages. Let's look at some prior art. A disclaimer in advance, I know pretty much all of these languages or ecosystems to some extent. I will not pretend to be an expert in any of them. I will get things wrong, and I am way too tired to duck if you throw rotten fruit at me, so please don't. Please come find me after and correct me, and I will try and get it right the next time I give this talk. Okay, so let's start almost at the beginning. Perl has CPAN. CPAN wasn't actually the first internet-based package repository, which I didn't actually know until I was doing research for this talk. That was CTAN for the tech community. But this was the first one that I know of, at least, for a general-purpose language. No offense to tech lovers, I love tech, but not really a general-purpose language. CPAN first was released in 1995. It's kind of quirky. Some of those quirks are just because, from a modern perspective, like it was really intended to be a system-level package manager, not a project-level package manager, because nobody had really invented project-level package management in 1995. Some of the quirks are just because it's Perl, and Perl is famously quirky. It has about 34,000 modules today. CPAN's really interesting, though, from a namespacing perspective, because it does two things that are... One thing that's almost unique. I realize that's a tautology. And one thing that's at least very interesting. So the first is it has arbitrary namespacing levels. Like there's no limit on how far down you can go. So this is the deepest package name I found. They're at 18 levels. I counted them. I actually found this not because I was looking for it, but because it turned out I'd accidentally implemented one of the typo checks in an exponential way. And when it broke this up and tried to basically swap them all around, it turns out it basically ground my laptop to a halt for several hours. So don't do that. The other thing that's more interesting, though, and I don't know how obvious it is at first glance at 8:47 in the morning, is most of the other language ecosystems we're going to look at have authors or some sort of like origin or organization at the top level, right? Like if you go grab, say, the JSON library in Java to do some JSON, like it starts out com.google.whatever because it's originally written by Google. Same thing in .NET, like if you grab the JSON package, it's like newtonsoft.json because it was written by Newtonsoft. So Perl doesn't actually do this. CPAN, there's the odd example of it, but CPAN is almost entirely organized by function rather than origin, which I think is a really interesting approach. And essentially namespacing is open. Like, you know, if somebody wanted to go in and go, I'm not going to say the whole thing, but like Acme working out ... instance, and they wanted to add another level, they don't need permission from that first author to do it. Again, it was 1995. Like, I kind of want to do the Bluey, it was the 80s man joke, but yeah. It was the 90s. So, perhaps unsurprisingly, there's not a lot of evidence of name squatting or typo squatting in CPAN. And I don't know if that's like the scale, because it's a relatively small registry. I don't know if that's the age of the ecosystem, because the internet really did used to be friendlier. Or it's just that like script kiddies don't know how to write Perl. It's probably a bit of all of those, if I'm being honest. All right, so I mentioned Java. Let's go talk about Java. So Java's also got a slightly interesting take on this, as it turns out. The most commonly used public repository is Maven Central. There are like 570,000 packages in there. It's gigantic. I assume there is a package for literally everything. Packages are published within namespaces. They're also called groups fairly interchangeably in the Java world. If I know I'm probably skimming over some deep technical distinction I don't understand, please come find me later. Within each namespace, or group, you can have, you know, packages of any name. And then the community norm is to use dashes to separate name components within there. Now, there are two aspects of this that are interesting. The first is, when you actually specify a package, you specify the group and the artifact, which is the package name. Again, like there's multiple names for things, separately. Like they're not collapsed into one string, like pretty much every other language ecosystem I know of. So that's kind of interesting. And what that does is it kind of makes it a lot harder to basically issue some sort of typo squatting attack. There's a second aspect to this too, which is the group IDs are verified. The modern practice on this is that you have to own the domain name, essentially. So like if you want com.google, you have to put a text record into google.com to verify it. There's some legacy holdovers from past times where that's not true, but that's true right now. So you've got strong verification, and you've got a situation where you don't have to convince someone to spoof one name, but you've got to convince them to put in two incorrect names to actually attack them. Now, there's nothing stopping you having the same artifact name in multiple namespaces. There's like 48,000 duplicates in the data set, so obviously this happens. They're pretty much all innocent. Like, they're things like, you know, lots of people have a test package or something like that with like test helpers. But at the namespace level, which is really the only one you can actually attack, there's basically no evidence of typo squatting in practice because you have to verify stuff. So in summary, validated groups, origins, authors, sources, namespaces, I don't know, pick your favorite now. Having their own full-blown namespace seems to be fairly resistant to spam or malware. Okay, good to know. All right, .NET. This is the logo of NuGet, which is the most common, and I think now the official, adopted by Microsoft repository for .NET packages. Has 376,000, and it's kind of a mixture of things we've already seen. So there's arbitrary levels of namespacing. Like Java, the namespacing is generally by author, not by, or origin, not by function. The one interesting aspect of this, and I now wish I'd put this on the slide, sorry, is like, there's no technical separation like Java of your origin namespace and package names. But you can reserve prefixes by emailing NuGet support. As far as I can tell, what actually happens at that point isn't public, like what the verification looks like. I can easily imagine that it probably involves, like, you know, do you have a trademark or do you own the domain name or something like that, but I don't actually know. And then prefixes can have, once you have a reserved prefix, then only you can publish stuff under that. So that's good at least. And there's like a delegation thing if you need sub-prefixes. Microsoft uses this heavily. But NuGet did have an incident earlier in the year where there was a significant typo squatting attack. So one of the interesting things here is it turns out, for example, Coinbase apparently hadn't verified their prefix, and therefore there were no restrictions on other people creating things within that namespace. So all of a sudden you've got Coinbase.core, apparently 122,000 installs of this happened, and what it basically did was the malware went and basically looked for cryptocurrency wallets because, you know, this was about 12 months ago, and cryptocurrency was still kind of a big thing at the time. There were others where, like, so there's an official, like, I don't even think it's installable through NuGet, but there's like a system namespace, right? You know, a lot of the stuff's in system. It's like java.lang in Java. So somebody was like, well, sys isn't reserved, so I'm just going to, you know, put stuff in sys. So obviously this all got cleaned up. There's very little evidence of typo squatting in the corpus today. I also have to give NuGet a shout out. They have like the second easiest way of getting a full dump of the metadata in their index out there. Good job. But clearly, like the optional verification and sort of the arbitrary nesting didn't work perfectly in this case. So, okay, what do we learn there? Verification is not a panacea. It doesn't automatically mean that you're going to do things right because you need to verify the right things and you need to do them in the right way. And therefore, you can still have attacks. All right, final non-flat case I'm going to talk about is PHP. So this is the logo of Packagist, which is the second packaging system created for PHP, or packaging backend. The first one was Pear, which was basically a straight rip of CPAN, and I don't think anyone was very sad to see it go. Pear was complex to use in practice, so in 2012, Composer and Packagist came out, and Packagist is the registry. So today, Packagist has 383,000 packages, and its naming scheme, I actually should have asked this last night since I was at the same table as Nils, and I completely forgot to. My hypothesis is it was inspired by GitHub, because it was 2012 and everybody was like super excited about GitHub at the time. So there's like one level of nesting. There's like some sort of namespace, like your GitHub username or an organization, and then a package name. So, okay. There has been at least one typo squatting attack I know of. So somebody basically registered SymFont, very similar to kind of the sys system thing that I mentioned earlier, except this is more obviously a typo. I can definitely understand that. I used to work in a Symfony code base, and I definitely type SymFont about as often as I type Symfony. So good job, whoever came up with that. I thought Packagist would actually be more of a target. PHP, for those who haven't used it, I used to be a PHP developer in multiple senses of that word, has a somewhat deserved and somewhat undeserved reputation for being super insecure. And I think anybody who ever worked on like at a design agency like I did doing WordPress sites probably is aware of like the attacks can happen. So I thought there'd be a bit more, but there's actually not very much evidence of sustained attacks on this. I think .NET does, or NuGet does have a bigger surface area because of the arbitrary levels of nesting. I didn't show an example of this, but I mean, one obvious thing would be if you've got, say, Newtonsoft as your top level name, you could easily do Newton.soft, right, for a malicious package, and that would be very difficult for some users to distinguish. So I think not having the arbitrary namespacing actually kind of helps in this case, but that's, you know, it's still obviously not ideal. Finally, before I move on, I did find this. This is actually a name-squatted thing called Laravel. There's a popular framework called Laravel, and the only thing it does is it's like the exact same except all the things are emoji. And I thought that was really cute. So good job. Okay, finally, I'm just going to lump the flat namespaces in together because I'm running out of time. So there's Python, there's Ruby, there's NPM-ish. I know there's optional scopes. Obviously, they're doing something right. PyPI has like 500,000 packages and is used everywhere. So they're obviously doing something right. But equally, PyPI and NPM have had a lot of typo squatting attacks in the last few years. Now, I'm not saying that as anything bad against them. This has nothing to do with the registries or the languages or the ecosystems. I think there are only two things in play here. The first is it's kind of easier in a flat namespace because you can just register all these things. And secondly, more importantly, they're just the most attractive targets. Like, everyone uses NPM, right, to a first approximation. Almost everyone uses Python for something. Like, I don't think this has anything to do with the registries. In fact, I think they're doing a better job than could be expected. But it's just really hard. There's such a deluge of users and packages getting uploaded. So I don't think the flat namespace is helping, but I also don't think it's the sole cause of this. And I think it's fair to say we don't see the same thing in Ruby. So, okay. So I'm going to bring it back to the beginning. Remember I said that Rust seems to have a particular problem. I just said Python has like 4 times the number of packages as Rust. Why do we have so much name squatting and spam and stuff? And it's because all of these other ecosystems have policies around this. Like, this is the classic, you can't use technical solutions for social problems. This is a social problem. So Python, for example, has a whole PEP about this, where it's got lengthy parts on how you can take over an abandoned package, or how to define spam and what happens in that case and what you do. Ruby has almost every other language ecosystem I've talked, and in fact, every other language ecosystem I've just talked about has this, and Rust doesn't. So this is what we're trying to address with the RFC. Because I know the existence of this PEP and the existence of some of these policies is not always universally popular, particularly if you have to be the person who's on the other end of the email address that gets this. I am with other people for Rust, so I get it. But I'm going to say pretty categorically, I think having this policy is still better than not having this policy, even if it causes problems. Okay, so what do I actually think we should do about Rust namespacing? Obviously, I think we should put a policy in place, but that's an orthogonal discussion. What do I actually think we should do? So I'm going to admit my bias at this point. I thought at the start, when I started this process, when I proposed this talk, when I was first thinking about this, that the packages solution was about the right level of like complexity versus security. Like, one level of namespacing, we have to do it as optional namespacing because, I mean, if you were designing this afresh, you'd have a different set of trade-offs. But we already have a flat namespace. You can't do anything about that. That's not going anywhere. So I thought that was going to be the solution. And now I've started digging into this, I'm not sure anymore. I think if I was doing a brand new package ecosystem, I'd be really tempted to do something more like Java and have like 2 separate identifiers that uniquely identify a package. We can't do that. Like, I would love to do that, but we can't. So the conclusions I've come to are 4. But there's a problem, which is the Crates.io team, like, we're lucky enough that a couple of team members are paid by the Rust Foundation to some extent to work on this. But it's a volunteer team in general. So adding work to that team is really difficult. I don't feel personally comfortable going to people who are doing this in their spare time and saying, hey, we need you to take on like 15 hours a week of like admin work to go proactively verify things. So I'm still kind of putting my thoughts together, but here's where I think I've landed for like an existing ecosystem with a flat namespace that probably needs some level of namespacing. Arbitrary nesting I'm not super sold on, which is why I put the shrug there. I think .NET shows where it can have problems. I think Perl shows where it probably works pretty well. I feel like it's easier to start with one level but leave the door open, which is I think what Manisha's RFC says, so I'm glad for that. One thing I didn't expect to be super hot on now is like, I think you've got to do some level of verification, or at least have optional verification of top-level namespaces. and expose that and use that in your package manager when people are installing stuff. And I mean, that can eventually be the basis for like signing and for trust and verification. But just having some signal that yes, when you install something from the Amazon namespace that came from actual Amazon and not the Amazon, the river, I think is probably useful. There definitely needs to be ongoing analysis of new things that are getting registered and however you do your namespace. Those typo guard checks are great. As I said, I'm integrating them into Crates.io right now. I think that's a big win. They're not going to be a blocker, but just knowing as a repository admin that those things are there, I think is super critical. And finally, and I think most importantly, you need a policy, and that's not technical. Like, most of these other things are somewhat technical, but you need a way of basically giving yourself permission to steward the shared namespace, because it is a shared resource that everybody who uses your language ecosystem has to be able to use. So coming up with some way that you can do that in a way that the community will trust and is transparent, but allows you to not have your registry be gummed up by a bunch of spam is super important. It's easier if you have a benevolent dictator making the rules. We do not. All right, so in summary, I have succeeded in the standard tech bro process. I took something I thought was going to have a really obvious answer, and now I have more questions than I did to start with. So thank you for listening. I would love to hear your feedback, and I think I've got like 1 or 2 minutes for questions if anyone has anything.
Thank you for the talk. So I was curious. So Maven, as far as I know, uses DNS challenges, but it's a human process. Have you given any thought to concerns around either people losing access to a DNS site or?
Yes. Yeah. So this is actually this one actually comes up in a couple of ways in my experience, because you've got the basic one that you said. The one that's actually a little more insidious that we've had happen recently on Crates is a package was registered under a company name, so it's like company-something, and the only person who had push rights was somebody who got laid off 3 months ago. And it's like, good job. You really thought that one through well. So yeah, this is a problem, and this also comes up in the, not just be morbid at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, but this also comes up in the death scenario too, right? Like, what happens if the only person with push access dies? So I've thought about it, and I wish I had some super satisfying answer where I could say like, oh yeah, like, you just do X, Y, and Z. But to be perfectly honest with you, we're talking about this right now in the Crates team, and we don't really know. Like, we're trying to crib as much of this as we can from other ecosystems and try and figure out what they're doing. But yeah, it's like what happens when your verification is no longer valid. Like, what do you do in that scenario? And to be honest with you, I don't know at the moment. So if you have ideas.
Right, one more question.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the talk. So we have an organization at GitHub that has about 30 people with rights, and we actually publish our crates with a machine user.
Yep.
And this tends to work, except when things go wrong. We have to dive into the CI and figure it out because we're not doing it on our own machines. And it strikes me that the namespacing solution for us that's ideal would just be to map GitHub straight over to Crates and somehow align permissions.
Yes. So, okay, so there's So just for people who don't know, who don't do Rust, Crates right now only uses GitHub as an identity service. Like, there's no other option. You have to log in through GitHub. So there are two issues here. One of them is the community in general would like us to not do that. They would like us to support other options, but that's fine. That doesn't rule out what you just said. The second problem on that we have right now is a lot of the GitHub org stuff is actually opaque to us. What we get out of the API is not really sufficient to do that on an ongoing basis, and this was a conversation our team meeting like 4 weeks ago, is like we're trying to figure out a better way of doing that, because yeah, this is actually a real problem. Like, you're not the only ones who are doing that. I think long-term part of this is probably using a more standard workflow around OIDC and some of the other things that are being talked about here for machine users, but I don't have a super satisfying answer on this right now, just because I think we're at the stage where we're aware it's a problem, but we haven't really had the bandwidth to figure out what to do about it yet. So feel free to jump into Zulip or jump onto GitHub discussions for crates and to kind of tell us what you want to see. And I can't promise we'll do it, but getting the input would be really useful.
All right, so that's all the time we have for questions. I actually have a lot more questions, but I guess we'll take them offline. Let's thank our speaker one more time.